Well, you've twisted my arm into giving you a little interview about my life. So,
Well, it's an interesting one, so we're anxious to hear all of the details.
okay, well, to start with, I was born in March of 1922 at Muhlenberg Hospital in Plainfield, New Jersey, where I grew up. It was during the Depression, actually, that I grew up, from 1922 to the Depression ended, I guess, when Roosevelt came in 1933. And so a lot of my father's parents' friends lost their jobs. My father never did, so we were one of the lucky ones.
What did your father do for a living?
He was an engineer, but he graduated from Cornell University with a degree in engineering, but he became an editor of an engineering magazine called American Machinist. So living in Plainfield until I went off to college. Went to Vassar, and then that was the war started when I was at Vassar, and I left Vassar to. I heard that you got free flying lessons if you worked for Piper Cub in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. So I went down there. That's where I met Joan, my sailing buddy, and I stayed there taking flying lessons. That was when I first started taking lessons. But when the winter came, there was no more flying. So that's when we picked up and left. We hitchhiked all the way to New Orleans, and I got a job at the Times-Picayune. But in the meantime, we'd applied for jobs at the Norwegian Merchant Marine, and after just about a month on the paper, we were offered jobs as mess girls on a Norwegian ship. So I had to quit the paper, and we sailed off in the Caribbean on a Norwegian ship.
And this is before you needed to get any kind of permission, or was that after?
Yes, Joan lied about her age, and we both got Coast Guard passes. That's all you needed at that point.
Okay.
To sail, in domestic waters.
So you were in the Caribbean going?
Yes, yeah, we were.
This was a freighter of some kind?
Barranquilla and Cartagena.
Wow.
And and then when we came back to New Orleans, we took another trip, which went all the way to New York on our boat. When we got to New York, Joan's father interrupted. He didn't want her sailing like that, so he used his influence and got us kicked off the ship. Right. So that's when we decided that we'd go to radio school.
And you wanted to go to radio school so that you could do what?
So we could be radio operators on a ship. And by that time, Joan would be old enough so her father couldn't control her anymore.
Oh, and how old were you at that time?
I was 21, and Joan was 19.
And that's when you headed to New Orleans,
Yeah, right.
Headed south. Hitchhiking to New Orleans, that sounds rather adventuresome in and of itself.
Yes, it was, and luckily we got, in Virginia, we kept getting on and off rides. We got a guy who had a big truck in Virginia, and he really took us under his wing. And whenever we crossed the state line, he'd make us get out and walk across the state line, because he said that you could be arrested for carrying a minor across the state line, or something like kidnapping. So
That's
we went
great.
all the way to New Orleans, walking across state lines.
And so when you got to New Orleans, what did you do? I mean, you didn't have a place to stay, you didn't have jobs,
That's
you just
true.
had a few bucks in your pocket, I presume.
A very few bucks. We got a room that was $10 a week, and we were delivering telegrams, working for Western Union. And that's when I got a job at the Times-Picayune.
Which is what, the local newspaper?
Yeah.
And what was your job there?
I applied for a job as a an assistant, copy girl. And they said, when they interviewed me and saw my resume, they said, I think they could use you upstairs being the editorial room. So I went up there and they hired me as a reporter.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And what kind of...
Unfortunately, as I say, I was only able to stay there 1 month because in the meantime, we got offered jobs on the Norwegian Merchant Marine.
So you were really down there just waiting for your ship to come in, so to speak,
right.
biding time, trying to earn a couple of dollars to support yourselves.
Yeah, but I would have been happy to stay at the Times-Picayune, but, Joan was there and I didn't want to let her down, so we shipped out.
So this was the two of you were conspiring together on how you were going to help the war effort. Was this motivated by patriotic ideals or just a sense of adventure? So you saw this as an opportunity to go off and see the world like all the guys were doing in the Navy, and the girls were asked to stay home on the factory floor, and you wanted none of that.
Right.
So you were successful, as you mentioned, in going off for some regional trips on these freighters, but you had aspirations to go farther afield than that.
So when we got kicked off the ship in New York because of Joan's father, we decided to go to radio school, and that was a free wartime industry training program, and it took 6 months for us to get our radio operator's license.
And where were you taking? Where was the school?
That was down in the Lower East Side, Rivington Street.
In Manhattan?
In Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And after we got our licenses, we applied for passports, seaman passports, and were denied. And they said American women couldn't go to sea. So I wrote to my two congressmen and my senators, and they all wrote back and said, sorry, I can't help you. So I wrote to Eleanor Roosevelt, and the letter comes back and says, you may apply for your passport at this. And so I went there, and they were expecting me because Eleanor Roosevelt had interfered. So that's the way we got our passports.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And so Norwegian Shipping and Trade Mission had a ship ready for us. We had to get on a train and go all the way to Searsport, Maine to get our ship. And that was the beginning of a big adventure. But we lost our convoy, and so anyway, that's part of the story.
Okay. All right, so I'm ready whenever you are, so let's back up to the beginning here in terms of, Eleanor Roosevelt has intervened, so
yeah,
you can go ahead and start.
So after Eleanor Roosevelt intervened on our behalf, we were able to get our seamen's passports, and Norwegian Shipping and Trade had a ship ready for us in Searsport, Maine, and so we took a train ride, an all-night train ride to Searsport, and when we got to the ship, we discovered that we could hear all these bombs rolling down into the hold on this like this slanted thing, and it was kind of unnerving because we couldn't imagine having all those bombs on our ship.
So that's when you realized that the ship that you had been assigned to, the cargo was
Yes, right.
500-pound bombs,
Right.
thousands of them.
However, we settled into our cabin. We had a nice cabin right topside next door to the radio operator's shack. So.
And here you are, you're the only two women on the whole ship, or were there a couple?
Women on board. Yes.
And that must have been quite an interesting situation in and of itself, bombs aside.
Yes, well, all the attractive men on board were crew members, and we used to stand around, on deck talking to them, and the captain issued orders that we were not to mingle with the crew. So,
I see. Now, how did that meant you guys were pretty isolated then?
yeah, that's
Just
right.
the two of you were.
Because none of the officers were of any interest. Most of them were married, and the third mate who wasn't married, it was not too interesting for us. The only other person aboard was the security officer, the Army security officer, because we were on a Norwegian ship carrying cargo for the American troops. So.
And so at some point, shortly after arriving, I guess you set out to sea?
Set out to sea. No, at first we had an alarm because a ship similar to ours, carrying bombs like ours, exploded in England. The whole thing blew up, and they thought it was because one of the bombs had been faulty. So they had to take the ship way out into the harbor on a small island, unload all the bombs, and look at their numbers to make sure that we didn't have any bombs that might blow up. So that was slight delay.
Slight delay and a
Yeah.
source of real
And
anxiety, I would imagine.
We finally set off for the St. Lawrence River, where we were to meet with another crew, another bunch
Ship.
of
Convoy of
boats.
ships.
Convoy, and we were convoying, going to England and to Russia with these bombs. And when we got to Iceland, in the middle of the night, it turns out that we lost our convoy. For some reason, a signal was missed, and we lost our convoy.
Became separated from them.
Yeah, and I was off watch. My watch was 8 to 12, and I was in bed, and the captain comes knocking on my door and asked me, did I miss any calls from... He was blaming me for losing the convoy. And I said, absolutely not. You know, I was in the Radio Shack the whole 4 hours, and I didn't miss any calls. So I don't know how that happened, but he didn't want to go on without a convoy. So he turned around the ship, and we went back to Boston.
After all that.
Yeah.
Speak for a minute about the working conditions. You were in a little room. Talk about what you actually did on the ship.
Oh, I actually had the 8 to 12 watch in the Radio Shack, and I would sit there. We had radio silence because if your radio was on, you could be located by the enemy submarines. So we had radio silence, but we had something called BAMs, Broadcast Allied Merchant Shipping, which came on at given hours. Like in my case, at 10 o'clock, we had BAMs, and I would copy all these messages.
Are these coming in on Morse code, or how are they coming?
No, yes, we had a code book. It all came in code.
So it's coded signals? Is it in Morse code? It's coded Morse code, or what's it?
Yes, it was in Morse code.
But it wasn't regular Morse code. It was in some sort of code that you had to decipher after you received it.
It would be in numbers, most of them. And then I would take the code book and decode the message and take it to the bridge.
So you were often one of the first, I guess, the first to learn of things that were going on because you were the one who were receiving these messages.
That's when I found out about the ship that was. I'm getting ahead of the story. We finally left Boston with orders to go to the Philippine Islands with our 500-pound bombs. So we sailed south, went through the Panama Canal, one of the first ships that went through the Panama Canal, because the canal was closed during the war, because they were afraid that somebody could blow it up by sailing through there with a
Ship full of bombs.
right. And so we had no convoy going in the Pacific. The captain decided to zigzag all the way to the Philippines. So our course was, it took us 40 days to get to the Leyte in the Philippines because of this crazy course.
I'll cut this part out. Okay. repeat what you just said. It took us 40 days.
Our course was a zigzag course because he wanted to avoid the submarines. If we'd gone straight from the Panama Canal to the Philippines, that was an obvious route that the submarines would be looking for us. So we were zigzagging. And as I said, we had radio silence, but one night the radio silence was broken by a message from a ship that was it said, submarine following, firing on Seine. And that's the last I heard from them. But obviously they must have been sunk because that was all that they sent.
Were you alarmed or frightened or seasick during this trip? What was life on board on the ship like for you?
Initially, we were somewhat, nauseous, and we had, trouble eating. And the food was horrible on that ship. There was something called brown cheese that they were showing up at every meal, and it was just horrible. But that's all we had, so we had to. And I remember seeing the potatoes on board. They were in a big crate on deck, and they started sprouting green sprouts about 10 days out. So that was the last of the fresh food. It was all horrible, canned fish, and I can't believe what it was so horrible.
I'm going to pause for 1 second. Okay, so we're back on life on board, and you're zigzagging across the Pacific, and you've just heard about the ship that has sunk. What was life like on board at that time? You mentioned being seasick. Were you nervous, worried? What was life?
No, we quickly got over feeling woozy, so that was fine. Life on board, as I say, I had the 8 to 12 watch, and then when I came off watch, I went to bed, and Joan came on at 12 to 4, and then after, I would sleep until about 6 and have breakfast and get back on my 8 o'clock watch.
That was 8 o'clock in the a.m. or?
Both.
Oh, I see. So you did 2 watches. 8 till 12 twice a day.
Right.
And was there any communication with the outside world from your family? Were you able to get the occasion?
No, not when we were at sea. There was no communication until we got to the Philippines.
And so finally, 40 days later, you arrive in the Philippines, and I guess you're delivering bombs to an American base.
We were going to deliver. We got to Leyte. They didn't want us in Leyte. We never even got aboard off the ship. Then they sent us to Manila.
When you say they didn't want you, there was some miscommunication about who wanted the bombs delivered where?
Exactly. So we were in southern Manila, southern Luzon, which was Batangas, which is where we landed. And there was no space ashore, so we were anchored out. The harbor was full of anchored boats, and the only way you could get ashore was on a lifeboat. So we didn't have to be radio operators when we were anchored out, so we would get on the lifeboat and spend the day in Batangas. And we discovered the USO Club there and started spending a lot of time there and got to be friendly with the director. One night the lights went out. We happened to be there, and the director said to us, well, why don't you get up on stage and start these guys singing. And so I did that. I got up on the stage, and he shined a flashlight on my face, and I said, okay, let's all sing God Bless America. Anyway, so when that friendship eventually helped us after the war, but I'm getting ahead of the story there. We finally were sent to Okinawa with our bombs. Again, we were anchored out in the harbor, and no place to go ashore and unload these bombs. So we were just, we were, when they found out that there were girls on board, we got this parade.
They meaning all the military, thousands of military men that were in this
We
area.
got a parade of boats, little lifeboats passing the ship. And we would stand at on the deck and wave to
American
these guys.
girls.
Pretty girls.
Is this the time where I saw the pictures where some of the crew members on your ship they heard that you liked to sail, had sailed little sailboats as a kid, and they built some little makeshift sailboat for you?
Oh, that's right, yes. No, that was after the war when I was at the USO Club.
I see.
That they did build a little sailboat, right.
Okay, so here you are, you're going from port to port with these bombs, which I guess in the...
So we were in Okinawa when this typhoon was rumored to be coming. So all the ships were ordered to depart from the harbor because they were afraid it was going to strike, and all these ships were sitting there. And so we sortied to the east. And what happened was that the typhoon turned around and caught up with us. And it was fabulous. The ship was listing so hard to one side and the other that I had to hang onto the typewriter on my desk, or it kept sliding away from me. And
Are you terrified?
it was scary, yes.
And this is a ship full of bombs in the middle of a hurricane.
Yes, and we were really, the ship was rolling from side to side, and it was impossible to walk.
And how long did this go on for?
It went on, by morning, by the time the sun came up, the ship, the typhoon had subsided, but there were a lot of tragedies, a lot of ships. We were the lucky ones, but a lot of the ships foundered, especially the Navy ships, the little P-45s.
And I guess you're hearing about all this because you're the radio operator and
Yes.
you're hearing the messages.
And finally we heard a message that there were some men in the water, and the ship ahead of us, we were convoying back to Okinawa, and we heard that there were men in the water, and all the ships passed these guys. They were waving and yelling, and our captain stopped. And when he stopped the ship, it shudders, because he's like putting on the brakes. He's reversing the engines, actually, and the ship was shuddering, and I was still in bed. It was about maybe 6 a.m, and I got up and threw some clothes on and went out. And they have a bell that rings that said
All hands on deck?
all hands on deck. Thank you. And so I said, Joan, it's all hands on deck. She said, I'm not getting up. She'd just come off watch at 4 o'clock. So I went out, and sure enough, these guys were in the water hanging on to a life raft. And there were 2 of these guys, and we stopped the ship, sent a lifeboat out, and rescued them.
Wow.
And they were in pretty bad shape. They had life jackets on, and their necks were all absolutely raw from these life jackets, rubbing their necks they were in the water almost 48 hours. And
they were the lucky ones.
the first things I said is this a ship with the girls on it? And they put them in sick bay, but they couldn't wait to get out of there. Anyway, we enjoyed their company until they had to get off back in Okinawa. Heard all their stories.
All right, so you still have this boat full of bombs that nobody seems to want. What happens
That's right.
next?
And finally, as I forgot to tell you, that during the typhoon, the bombs got loose and they started rolling back and forth. And the captain went ashore and he said, if you can't unload us, I'm leaving because this is a dangerous situation. So
This is while you were still in port?
still in Okinawa. And he actually told them he wasn't going to hang around because if they weren't going to get rid of these bombs. So we went back to Batangas in the Philippines. And finally, we finally went to Subic Bay and unloaded these bombs in Luzon. And that was not long before the war was over. And we were back in Batangas going to the USO Club all the time. And the guy there said, why don't you ladies stay on here in Manila and in the Philippines, and you can work at the USO Club. I'll give you a job here. So we asked the captain. He said, fine with me. You know, we don't need 3 operators now. The war's over. So that's how we ended up staying in the Philippines.
And what year is this now? Is this 1945?
When the war was over, I guess so, yes.
So the war is winding down. It's, I guess there's...
The war was over by the time we were able to get off the ship, because during the war they needed 3 operators, 24-hour watch.
But there's still many American servicemen in the area, so
Lots
they
of
still have a USO,
Oh,
and
yes.
it's going to take a year or 2 before they're all
Right,
brought
exactly.
home. So the infrastructure remains, and then you stayed on at the
Yeah.
USO. And how long were you at the USO?
I was in the Philippines another year before I went back south, homestead, to the States.
And what was that year like? Talk about what you were doing.
Well, we started working in the hotel, in the USO Club in Batangas, and then they transferred us to another club in Tal, which was right on there was a bay there, and it was a beachside to USO Club. It was perfect. And the director there was a USO, a Salvation Army major, who was just a goof off. He let me do all the work, write all the monthly reports for the...
So you were running the place.
I was literally running the place. He was just back in his tent, just loafing. But in any case, that was a good assignment. And after I was there about 6 months. Joan and I were there about 6 months, and they decided that it was a leave club, and the guys would come for 6 days, and the last day, Sunday, they'd leave, and others would arrive on Monday and stay over. So we could do the same program over and over because we had a different. So we'd have a dance, and we had a craft shop where Joan liked to do the craft, make all kind of stuff. And that's when they made this sailboat for me. It wasn't much of a boat. It had a sail, but it couldn't. You couldn't tack in it because it was just a bunch of boards stuck together. But that was a good assignment.
And then after a year was up, what happened after your USO?
Well, after about 6 months at the leave club, they weren't doing leaves anymore because these guys were going back to the States. So that club closed, and one of the men there wanted me to come to his place. So I got another job. Can't remember the name of that place, but I was running the USO Club in this.
A different USO club?
Yes, and Joan was. We were separated at that point. She went to another assignment, and when that club closed, then they sent me to Manila. I was at Manila Leaf Club, also running it all by myself. And
So you moved up the ranks of the USO
yes,
hierarchy.
right. So
Okay, you kept
that
bringing,
was my last assignment in the Philippines.
and how did you get home? Did you and Joan finally get back together to go home together, or did you?
No, Joan got into trouble because she got on an airplane with these guys that were flying. Japan had surrendered by this time, so she flew to Japan on this plane, and they frowned on that, and they sent her back to the States. So I never did get together with her again in the Philippines. But I was at the Manila Leaf Club until it was finally time to go back to the States.
Hold on one second, let me just. Okay, so we're rolling. So let's start with where you are in terms of leaving the Philippines.
I flew back on the C-47, and we had to island hop because, of course, its range was, not that great. So we stopped at Okinawa, and we stopped at Hawaii and Wake Island. These were all stops along the.
Are you spending a couple of days in each of these locations, or just?
We stopped. I jumped ship in Hawaii.
Jumped the airplane.
In other words, we're supposed to be sailing and flying. We're just supposed to be gassing up and continuing the flight. But there was a friend from my hometown that had married a Hawaiian, and I called her up and went over to see her. By the time I got back, my plane had left.
So you didn't so much
There's no
jump
problem because
ship
I
as.
had papers.
They left
So I
without
got
you.
on another airplane and landed in San Francisco, where my aunt Jane was living at the time. So I visited with her for a few days before getting on a boat, getting on a train that took me all the way back to
All the way across the country,
Yeah,
back to
right.
Plainfield again?
yeah.
And then here you're reunited with your parents, I guess, for the first time in, what, a couple years?
Yeah, right.
I guess they're happy to see you, alive.
Yeah, and that's when I went to New York and got a job with Prentice Hall, which was a publishing company. I was doing trade book publicity for them. The trade books are the books that people read. They did Prentice
Like
Hall
fiction,
published a
those-
lot of textbooks, but they had a trade book division as well.
Which is the popular books that people read.
Yes,
Okay.
right.
And what did that job involve?
What is that? What?
What did that job involve?
It involved before the book was published, we'd have copies of it, before it was out in the bookstore. So I'd get a copy of the book, and I got a lot of clues from the jacket copy, and I'd send out stories about the book to various newspapers, particularly books that were interesting to women. I had a thing called the Women's Page, and I'd send these books out to the women's editors and a whole bunch of newspapers.
To drum up publicity for the book.
And also locally, the authors would come to town. There wasn't almost no television at that time, but I would book them into radio programs, for interviews and so forth. Escort them to the radio theater.
And where were you living at the time?
I was living in Greenwich Village at that point.
And this is now, what, late 40s, early 50s?
That would be, I guess it would be in the 50s, yeah. Let's see, I got married in 51, so it must have been the late 40s.
And what was life like in Greenwich Village, Manhattan, back in 1949?
Yeah, it was fun.
Post-war.
We had a great little apartment on Charles Street, and me, my old friend from childhood was Kip Kip Linke, and the other one was
Was it Liz that you lived with?
Liz Mahoney.
Yes, later to become
Kip and
Liz Lewis.
Right, exactly. And I was able to walk to work because Prentice Hall was at Fifth Avenue and 13th Street. So that was nice.
What was your rent back then, do you remember?
It was $90 for the three of us, so it was $30 a month.
And this is a
And we would,
one bedroom, two bedroom?
it was 2 bedrooms, and one of the bedrooms had double bunks. So that's how we,
This is a two-bedroom Greenwich Village apartment for $90 a month.
right, exactly. And it was on the second floor, it was the walk-up, and in the back there was a garden. So, we had a nice view.
And then you settled in and got to know some people in this area,
And our maid happened to be turned out to be Emma Baldwin, and her son, James Baldwin, turned out to be a famous writer. And
Wow.
she was supporting him at the time. He was in Paris, and she would, the little money that she earned cleaning houses, we paid her $5, and she would clean our apartment once a week. She'd send money to James in Paris.
that's fantastic.
Turned out that, that he got to be quite famous, and his books were popular, so he was able to give up her money. But that was a good time. And that's when I met my husband, because St. Clair was one of our, hangers-on. He was a regular coming for lunch. He lived in the neighborhood. So when I came to join the apartment, he said to his brother, there's a new girl down here you ought to get to know. And so Carl came down and met me, and he was dating a girl who was in the chorus at South Pacific, which was a long-running Broadway show. So, but she didn't get off work till about 10:30, so I'd have an early date with Carl, and then he'd leave me at 10 o'clock to pick up this gal at the stage door. So, anyway, eventually the show closed and she left town. So he was stuck with me.
What year were you married?
We were married in February 1951.
And were you still in Greenwich Village?
Yes, still in Greenwich Village. And but he had a small apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment, and I moved into that until I got pregnant, and I knew we needed more space. So he was still at work, and I went to see this apartment on Jones Street, and
Still in Manhattan?
still in Manhattan, just a few blocks from Washington Square, just a few blocks from where we were living. I called him up and told him that he had to see this apartment because it was very nice, and I thought we would like to have it. And he said, "Go ahead and sign the lease. I don't have to see it. I'll take your word for it." So I did, and so we moved to Jones Street, which was much nicer. We had a nice little room right off the master bedroom, which turned out to be the nursery for the baby, who turned out to be a little girl named Carla.
My sister.
Yeah.
And what was Dada doing, my father? What was he doing for a living?
He had quit his job with the Signal Corps, and
Which is a branch of the Army, right?
Yeah, doing freelance writing. And he in this apartment, he had a little room of all his own, a little office, which was on the other, in back of the kitchen. It was a perfect apartment. And I would, of course, I had to quit my job at Prentice Hall. They let me stay on for 6 months, and they finally said, we can't keep you any longer.
You're too pregnant.
Yes. But, that was the last time I saw Prentice Hall.
And then March of 1952, Pugh was born.
Pooh was born, and I used to take her in the carriage over to Washington Square, which turned out to be some people I knew from college were also there with their babies. So we every day meet in Washington Square.
In the park.
So, yeah.
In the Greenwich Village.
And finally, that's where Carla first started walking. She would just hang onto the fence and walk in Washington Square.
And
So when I got pregnant for the second time, we decided that we really needed to move out of Manhattan, that this was too small and for two children. So we rented a house in Baldwin.
Baldwin, Long Island.
Yeah. And that's where my son Carl was born.
That's me.
Yes.
And Dad is now commuting back to New York City for
He's
his...
commuting to the Signator. He went back to the Signator.
Oh, he did. He went back
Yeah.
to his...
Yeah.
Okay. He made a go at it as a freelancer, and that just wasn't
Yes,
enough
exactly.
money or something.
In fact, his mother wrote to the people at the Signator that they should take him back.
So he's commuting, a daily commute from Baldwin.
Yes.
And where were we living in Baldwin? Was that...
We were living initially.
It was a house near Baldwin, near Milburn Avenue, wasn't it? I
Yes,
thought there was
it
another
it
place.
just off Milburn Avenue. I can't think of the name of the street now, but
I always
that was
remember.
a rental.
I remember 22 Jones Street, but I guess that was
That's where
that was
we.
that was Pugh, where
ended up.
Pugh was born.
Yeah,
I see.
but we had this rental house for a year, and then we bought a house down in Baldwin Harbor.
305 Milburn Avenue.
Yes, Milburn Avenue.
That's which is the house I remember.
Right, and that was a nice big house with a fence around it. We have a dog.
Piccolo,
Piccolo, we have
right?
Piccolo.
Was it a
Didn't
beagle?
last very long. He was a beagle, and he kept wandering off. And I finally gave him away because he just wasn't a very satisfactory dog. And that's when we got Tippy, who was half poodle and half collie.
Yes, a Pulley.
He was a great dog.
Now, somewhere along the line, you had a third child in here.
Oh yeah. Oh, I forgot about the third child. Yes, that's right. I got pregnant again, and that was only 18 months after you were born that Jackson was born.
And Jackson was born, I guess, January 23rd, 1956.
That's
Right?
right. 50, 54, 52, 54.
Yeah, there were 2
56.
years, more or less 2 years apart
Right.
from all of us. And then at some point, you guys decided, I guess Dad had decided he had had enough of the cold weather. Oh no, you were a school teacher too. Was that or no, was that, I guess the school teacher was when we
No,
were,
that's right. I went back to college and got my.
while you're still in Baldwin.
Yeah, when I was going to a school, going to Columbia and got my teacher's degree, and was doing my practice teaching down in Greenwich Village. And then that's when we decided to move to Florida. It was cold all the time, and so.
And actually, before we decided to move to Florida, you were decided to move somewhere warm, and you were trying places out.
That's right. We were exchanging houses, and we exchanged houses with the family in Puerto Rico, and
For a month.
That's
This is, I
right.
think,
They-
1960, maybe 61, if I
I
remember.
don't remember exact.
So I think we moved to Florida in 62.
Right. But we exchanged houses and cars. So we had a little car and a nice little house, and we.
Rio Piedras, right outside San Juan.
Rio Piedras, right, exactly. And we decided that we wouldn't want to move there. That was, we were thinking that we might want to move to Puerto Rico, but we decided that that would be not a good idea. So the next year, we traded houses with a family in Miami. And we liked Miami very much, and the next year we moved there. So.
Ended up in Devonwood for,
And ended up with first year we were renting a house on
Oh, that's
102nd
right.
Street, the Lions House. And we had it was actually, there was no heat there in that house, and it turned out to be a cold winter. So we had a fireplace, and that was all we had for
this
heat.
was 4 acres in the middle of the woods with a 50-foot swimming pool, as I remember.
Yes, that's right.
That's my recollection as a kid.
Right. And the kids went to Pinecrest School, which was just down the block.
Rode our bikes to school every day.
You know, Jackson was in kindergarten, you were in 2nd grade, and Carla was in 5th grade, I think.
And when did you start teaching elementary school?
Yeah, that's when I was teaching, when we first moved here. I had already had that job lined up before we moved.
Oh, you did? Okay. 5th grade, and I forget the name of the school.
David Fairchild Elementary.
And how did you like teaching?
I liked it very much. I enjoyed it. The first year, the first few months, the class was really out of control. I wasn't very, I didn't understand that you had to keep the kids, disciplined and keep them from. And they took advantage of me, and they were and I decided I was going to quit because it was so horrible. I told the principal that come Thanksgiving I wasn't going to come back.
This is after only a couple of months.
Yes, and Miss Hammond said, "Oh, we're going to fix that," she said, and she had me sitting in with another teacher next door and to observe how she ran the class. And eventually, they said, after Christmas, the kids settled down quite a bit. So I finally got the kids under control and learned how to be a good teacher.
That's great. And how long did you teach for?
I taught there for 5 years. Took a leave of absence to get my master's degree and never went back.
Okay, so let's pause, and then what I want to do is, actually, let me stop the thing for a second, and whenever you're ready.
Oh, okay, so I wanted to get my pilot's license so that I could join the Women's Air Force Service Pilots. I went to Miami, Florida, and my mother had an apartment there, which she had paid for several months, and she was leaving, so she said that we could stay there until the lease was
Who's
up.
Lee? Is your college roommate?
Yeah, and Shirley, my friend from college. So the two of us got jobs driving taxi cabs on Miami Beach, Century Cab on Alton Road. And then I was taking flying lessons, in my spare time. I would park the cab there and take an hour's flying lesson.
And where were you flying for? What was it?
This was Embry-Riddle Flying School. They had a seaplane base there on MacArthur Causeway. And so that's where I finally got.
So you were taking lessons in seaplanes?
Yes, I got my pilot's license flying seaplanes.
Wow.
Which was great because, anywhere in Florida, there was a landing space, to get your license, you had to do cross-country flight. My cross-country flight was to Boca Raton. I flew to Boca Raton, landed in the water, and turned around and flew back to Miami. That satisfied that requirement.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So, and driving a cab in Miami Beach was interesting because a lot of characters. The best deal was the flight, somebody who wanted to go to Miami Airport, which was a long, long trip, and you made more money on a long trip like that. So, but they wouldn't let you pick up passengers there. All these guys, cabs were already parked there, and wouldn't let any strange cabs. So I had to go back to
Deadhead
beach,
back.
empty.
Yes.
Yeah.